There was once a person, nameless, both pitiable and detestable, yet utterly ridiculous. That was AQ. Most people are surely familiar with AQ from Lu Xun's classic novel. The true story of AQ, we've all chuckled at this character. But behind that laughter, you might suddenly recognize the image of an adult who is also pitiable, detestable, and ridiculous. This phenomenon remains vividly real in society even today. A part of AQ exists within each of us. If you understand AQ, you might also recognize 3 truths about life. These are precisely the 3 truths that can help you shed light on your own limitations, your past, and your wounds, allowing you to rise strong from life's delusions. Everyone has, at some point, self-anesthetized with the spiritual victory method. AQ was a man from the very bottom of society. He had no family name, no hometown, no home, and no stable job. A man with such 6 no's was naturally despised by many in society. Yet, AQ felt no shame, considering it perfectly normal. One day, after 2 bowls of wine, AQ, dancing wildly, boasted to everyone that he was related to old Master Zhao, a respected figure with a prominent family in the village. AQ meticulously calculated that according to seniority, he was 3 generations senior to young Master Zhao, the scholar. Upon hearing this, Master Zhao rushed over and gave him a resounding slap. "AQ, you scoundrel, how dare you claim kinship with me?" AQ fell silent, not daring to argue back, accepting the loss of his own name. But soon after, he reasoned with himself, "My son will surely be much more successful than them in the future." And AQ became cheerful again. He continued to be joyful, even though he struggled to survive day to day, never knowing what tomorrow might bring. This was because he possessed a miraculous weapon, the spiritual victory method. When AQ was beaten, powerless to resist, he would wait until his tormentor left, then secretly declare in his heart that the person who had just beaten him was his own son. The whole world is utterly disgraceful now. With such thoughts, AQ could continue to be happy. One day, AQ was arrested but showed no panic. He told himself that perhaps sometimes people just have to be arrested and imprisoned like this. Even when AQ truly tasted the bitterness of failure, he still smiled. That time, he was lucky enough to win a lot of money gambling, but it was snatched away. So AQ promptly hid himself. This feels just like beating an opponent. Satisfied, AQ fell into a deep sleep. In short, no matter what happened, AQ could always find an explanation favorable to himself, allowing him to build a world where he was always spiritually victorious. In that world, the weak, like AQ, could isolate themselves from the society of their time. The spiritual victory method became a crucial psychological defense mechanism, allowing AQ to retain the last shred of joy in his impoverished life. Some say that AQ came from an impoverished background and difficult circumstances, so how could he survive without such optimism? But was AQ truly happy, truly optimistic? Not only this character, but even in today's era, you will find many people who still cannot distinguish between true optimism, true self-confidence, and self-anesthesia. Much like AQ, that is why the spiritual victory method appears everywhere. Within each person's heart, such an AQ always lurks, occasionally leaping out to perform solo. When they fail an exam, they claim the test was too challenging, or that they didn't perform well because they weren't feeling well. Or when they make a mistake at work and are criticized by colleagues, thoughts like, "I don't need this job anyway," or "They're just jealous of me," constantly echo in many people's minds. Or when they see others succeed, some immediately think, it's just because they were lucky to have family support. Or when encountering conflict with others, some will protect themselves by belittling the opponent or exaggerating their own advantages, and so on. These comforting words might seem to soothe our ego, but they cannot deceive our true selves. AQ's spiritual victory method is a combination of 3 parts anger, 3 parts resentment, and 4 parts self-compromise. Therefore, the simplest way to determine if you are mentally deceiving yourself like this character is to ask if the words you speak come from a fit of anger, from resentment, and if you are finding reasons to escape reality and make excuses for yourself when faced with obstacles. Injecting a dose of anesthesia to avoid feeling like a failure is always easy, but the easier it is, the more dangerous it becomes. It will gradually keep us in a psychological slumber, burying us in a shell, isolating us from true growth and transformation. That is why, when faced with something that displeases or upsets you, do not be quick to anger, do not be quick to complain, and certainly do not justify yourself. Because all of these are merely sedatives that lull you into a false spiritual victory. The weaker a person is, the more they enjoy venting their anger on those even weaker. Once, after being beaten, AQ had nowhere to vent his fury. Just then, he encountered Xiao, a young girl, going outside. He spat, then touched her freshly shaven head. The people in the tavern noticed, making AQ gloat as if his victory had been recognized. He then pinched Xiao's cheek hard. Everyone burst into laughter, and Xiao, ashamed, ran away. AQ's previously trampled self-esteem was now soothed by him venting his anger on Xiao. He was utterly triumphant. Lu Xun said that the weak are always angry, but they draw their swords against those weaker than themselves. We might think AQ is despicable for fearing the strong and bullying the weak. But we still see many people in companies who are oppressed by their superiors, yet they display terrible attitudes towards interns and new colleagues. We still see students who are bullied by older students, but then they turn around and make things difficult for younger children. We still see fathers who endure frustration at work, only to bring their anger home and yell at their wives and children. We still see people hiding behind keyboards, venting their feelings of insecurity by criticizing others. And we still see, somewhere in our own lives, that we often maintain the utmost politeness with outsiders, but easily yell and lose our temper with those closest to us. Isn't that just like AQ? The writer Lu Hanbing once said, "Anyone who bullies those below them must surely fear those above. That is human nature." The weaker a person's inner self, the more easily they are constrained by external circumstances. And when self-esteem loses balance, one must seek psychological compensation to restore a sense of control. In psychology, this is called displaced compensation. People always feel they need to have mastery over their own lives. When a person is under pressure, insulted, or suppressed by a source they cannot or dare not resist, that sense of mastery is lost. Having lost this feeling, they need to find a way to restore it. But if they lack the ability to control emotions and identify the root cause of the problem, they will choose a deviant path. This often involves projecting negative emotional energy onto a safer target, perhaps someone weaker or a relationship with less risk of loss. But this is merely a temporary anesthetic to restore psychological balance. It cannot solve the root of the problem and simultaneously keeps you in a continuous cycle of the weak bullying the weaker. All of this keeps people in a state of anger, unable to free themselves, ultimately harming themselves and others. If you realize you are using the spiritual victory anesthetic, when faced with moments of frustration, allow yourself to redirect emotional energy. Just pause for 3 seconds. Take a deep breath and name the emotion. I am angry because my boss criticized me. I am annoyed because my children are disobedient. I am angry because things are not going my way. Naming emotions like this helps bring distress back to the rational mind. Then you can turn to a different path, helping you release negative energy safely instead of spreading it to others. For example, we can journal, exercise, do chores, meditate, or contemplate emotions. The Buddha taught that anger is a fire that burns oneself before burning others. Only by looking directly at the fire in our hearts can we prevent it from consuming the entire forest around us. A strong person is not someone who has never been angry, but someone who knows how to channel anger into a cool stream that nourishes themselves and others. If you cannot change the wind, learn to control the sail. If you cannot change others, learn to master yourself. That is the best way to escape the delusion of the spiritual victory method. The more a person wants to display superiority, the more their insecurity is revealed. After teasing Xiao, AQ for the first time began to fantasize about a woman. While working as a servant for old Master Zhao, AQ saw Nanny Wu talking to him, then suddenly knelt down and proposed, "I want to sleep with you." AQ's flirting terrified Nanny Wu. She trembled and ran out the door, alarming the neighbors. When everyone learned of the incident, AQ lost his job. He was driven out, ostracized by the villagers, and forced to leave his hometown. Afterward, no one cared what became of AQ, but half a year later he returned, and people suddenly saw him in new clothes, acting very generously. News of AQ's newfound wealth quickly spread everywhere. He boasted that a scholar in town had taken notice of him and that he had the ability to help the scholar. So everyone showed overt respect to Aku, delighted, continued to boast about the things he had seen in town. He was so incredibly proud, as if his status in the village was about to become equal to Master Zhao's. In that moment, Aku felt he was standing at the peak of victory. But what was the truth behind this story? It turned out Aku had joined a gang of robbers, but only served as a gatekeeper. When people discovered Aku had lied to show off, they despised him even more. Those who always desire to appear superior in the eyes of others will always find ways to express themselves. And those who use fake successes to prove their excellence are, in reality, people with extreme inferiority complexes. As Adler wrote, a sense of superiority is merely inferiority walking upside down. This is like when we often boast about where we've been, what we've eaten, what we own, who we know, how talented we are, just to prove that we are different from others, and just to seek admiration and recognition. But the more we use external things to adorn ourselves, the more it demonstrates inner emptiness. Truly experienced people are often very calm. Truly confident people know how to be humble, because they don't need the admiring gazes of outsiders. They can still bask in simple and peaceful light. When people live clearly and understandingly, they no longer flaunt a sense of superiority on their faces. Compromise, justification, venting anger on weaker or closer individuals, or boasting about oneself. This is the trio of the spiritual victory method, anesthetic. Having even one of these manifestations is a sign that we are living in a delusion of illusion. Having two means we are truly immersed in this mental drug. And often, once one appears, the other two follow, forming a dangerous triad. It paralyses our ability to face the truth. It lulls us with the feeling that we are doing fine, but in reality, we are increasingly drifting away from self-control and the ability to build sustainable inner strength. Like a person lost in the desert drinking hallucinatory water, it only makes us temporarily forget our thirst. It does not save our lives. If we want to escape this delusion, we must first dare to look directly at the truth, that we need to change, that we need to transform. When we recognize that the deep root cause of every compromise, every fit of anger, every blame, and every habit of boasting is an expression of a lack of self-mastery, only then can we begin to change ourselves. Instead of justifying, learn to take responsibility for your choices and actions. Instead of venting anger on the weaker, find healthy ways to release it. Instead of showing off to seek recognition, quietly cultivate true ability. When we are fulfilled within, we no longer need anesthetics to seek a temporary, false victorious self. In Lu Xun's stories, there was never a shortage of bystanders who stood, laughed mockingly, and pointed fingers. Every time Aku was oppressed, there were plenty of people around holding their stomachs in laughter, adding fuel to the fire. Once, Aku happened to pass by the scene on the night of a robbery at old Master Zhao's house. Simply because of his past acts of theft, combined with the careless investigation methods of the officials at the time, Aku was arrested for robbery. Incidentally, the authorities used the excuse of punishing one robber to deter 100, so Aku was sentenced to death. When Aku was escorted to the execution ground, he looked around bewildered. The gazes of the people there converged into an aura that was both blunt and sharp, indifferent to Aku's injustice, yet ravenous like a pack of hungry wolves. For the first time in his life, Aku felt fear. After Aku died, public opinion naturally spoke ill of him as a bad person, but most were still unsatisfied, arguing that shooting was not as visually appealing as beheading. Moreover, that ridiculous condemned prisoner had been paraded through the streets for so long, yet he hadn't sung a single opera verse, making them feel their effort to watch was wasted. This is the spectator mentality. Outsiders watching Aku mocked him and found him contemptible, yet they did not know that they too were living by different versions of that very spiritual victory method. This is because people are often quick to criticize and ridicule others to create a sense of superiority for themselves, to temporarily forget the helplessness and emptiness in their own lives. The spectator mentality in The True Story of Aku is not something that directly kills people, but it creates an environment of collective oppression. It's no different from today's social media comments. Every haha reaction dropped onto someone else's tragedy. Therefore, the next step on this journey of growth is to learn not to criticize or judge anyone or anything. AQ is a small character, but also like a giant, multifaceted prism reflecting countless hidden corners of the human soul. Before we laugh at something, we should ask ourselves if, deep in our minds, we are using some form of spiritual victory to hide our own fears or shortcomings. Many people who read this work often see in it the shadow of oppressive feudal society or the limitations of the Xinhai Revolution. That is indeed a profound layer of meaning that Lu Xun wished to convey. But within the scope of this sharing, we will not delve into politics or history. Instead, we will simply read a work together, pause to reflect on the AQ psychological phenomenon, and then quietly examine ourselves. Because ultimately, the source of life's inspiration does not come from our observations of outsiders or society, but begins with awakening within our own hearts. It is the courage to admit that in each of us, a part of AQ still exists, more or less. And only when we are brave enough to look it straight in the eye can we step out of self-deception to live more mindfully, more lovingly, and more genuinely with ourselves and with our lives.